Nice and tight, that's good. What
Hi,
was your name?
I'm Madi.
Right.
I have had, well, I came from a sexually abusive family, and
Yep.
then I confronted them actually like starting 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I would say every single night since then, and maybe even before then, but I'm like chased, and they do everything to dismantle anything I can create. And I mean, it's pretty much the same way in real life for me without them being involved in the physical.
Yes.
Where I can never even get like, if I can get enough ground to even stand on with one foot, I'm lucky.
Yes. So here's you. Right? And the family that perpetrated the abuse, because it's always a family generally, because there's a certain preconditioning that's got to happen, and whatever the member of the family is, oftentimes it is the male, but sometimes it involves both, or is the female. Whatever it is, there's emotional preconditioning that established the abuse in the first place, right? And then so abuse occurred as a child, and then as we grow up to become an adult, a lot of abuse victims say, I don't want to be the victim anymore. What I'm going to do is stop these people from influencing my life. So what they do is they basically cut off their family from influencing their life anymore in a physical sense. The problem with that is that the person themselves doesn't deal with certain emotions generally. So they don't feel their shame. They just bottle it up and bury it. They don't feel their terror, because usually involved with any abuse there is a lot of terror and fear, and so they bottle that up and bury it as well. And usually there's also, capping a lot of this stuff is an anger that develops inside of the person as well about what happened to them. Does that make sense? And they bottle that up and bury it too, generally. So now we're suppressing very large amounts of internal emotions that all need to come out. Now, many people in their awake state then choose to do things like changing their name. So they want to have a complete different persona than the child of what happened to the child. Does that make sense? So they change their name. They start taking medication for their depression, because usually they have depression by this stage. They have some form of depression where they feel bad about themselves and they try to deny that they feel bad about it. So they go into a depressive state. Oftentimes then medication is needed, or they might have their first child and that triggers memories of events that they suppress. And so what happens then is they have what's called postnatal depression, and then that sort of leads into other things, and then they start taking medication in order to suppress those particular things as well. So there's a lot going on for this person who was the victim of this abuse. Agreed? And any person who's been abused knows that it's a lot going on, right? So there's this abuse that occurs. Many times this person also becomes hyper-vigilant. In other words, they're always on the lookout for something going bad. And they also become quite what you would call like manic in their behaviour many times. In other words, they're very, very busy in their life. They become very busy. Often they become what are called super achievers, where they're just busy, busy, busy. And the main reason why they achieve a lot is because they're busy all the time, because they don't want to stop, because as soon as they stop, they feel bad. So they're busy, their life, and so forth. So all of these emotions are still within the person, right? Not being released. So even though you have precluded this group of people who created the events from your life in a physical sense, because you can do that here physically, of course, you can't preclude them from your life in a spiritual sense without releasing these emotions. So from a spiritual sense, you're going to attract people, in your awake state, you're going to attract people who are very, very similar to the abusive family that you grew up with. In other words, you'll attract men from the spirit world who had the same kind of attitudes towards you that your father had, or whoever the abuser was had. And you'll attract women from the spirit world that have very similar attitudes and beliefs about what your mum has. Does that make sense? Now, most people on earth walk around very unconscious of the spirit entourage that they're walking around with. But these spirits are constantly trying to influence their life in a negative way, generally in a negative way, or what they believe is positive for themselves. In other words, they're very selfish spirits and they're just trying to get their needs met through this individual. But when you go to sleep, there is no barrier that you can enforce. Does that make sense? And so that means that these very people who follow you around all day or every day, that you can maintain a degree of autonomy from and maintain a degree of distance from, when you go to sleep, you can no longer maintain the distance. All of these things in you will attract these events and attract the kind of people who are willing to perpetrate these events in order for you to release the emotion. Does that make sense? There's a purpose to it, and that is that you finish up releasing these emotions. The majority of people, what they do, though, is they wake up terrified of all of these kind of emotions. Many people, therefore, don't sleep very well, or they sleep at odd times. You know, they sleep during the day when all the other people are at work, and they go to sleep. They wake up at night whenever all the other people are awake, so that anybody who's also asleep can no longer affect them. Right? Because remember, these attractions are still occurring at a soul level. So the only way to prevent these attractions from occurring is to actually work your way sincerely through these emotions. That's the only real way to prevent the attractions occurring in your sleep state. So what happens for most people is in their awake state, they have a semblance of normal life because they can prevent these kind of people to a degree from influencing them. And bear in mind that you can't prevent the spirits from influencing you still. And so the spirits generally surround you in that place. But when you go to sleep, you can no longer prevent their influence. And whatever emotions you have that you haven't dealt with will draw specific events to you involving generally the same kind of people.
So they seem to want me to not be able to exist, so that would be coming. So I'm attracted. I'm not quite understanding. Like, I know when I know there's this sense that they don't want me to be able to survive on the earth, get any groundings.
So not exist is the feeling they want. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
to not be able to have any sustenance at all.
So not survive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you think about your parents' emotions towards you.
Mm-hmm.
What were their emotions towards you in that regard?
Probably, I was one of 7 children, so just the fact that we existed was very problematic.
Correct. Yeah, the feeling I feel from them is this feeling that, you know, they didn't really want that many children.
They didn't. It was like an Irish Catholic, 7 kids,
Correct.
one after the other.
It was religiously forced upon them.
And then he had all the sexual abuse energy, and then she was the split-off wife who just sacrificed us up to it.
And became a martyr.
Yeah, and totally dissociative.
Yes.
Yeah, she didn't even have enough emotions to be a martyr. She just was like, I don't know what's going on, kind of thing.
Well, she knew what was going on, but she doesn't want to be conscious
Yeah, that was
of
her
it, right?
stance.
That's
yeah.
her stance. So her explanation is she doesn't know what's going on, but the reality is she knew what was going on and just didn't want to be
Well, and what's
conscious.
interesting, she has taken on the lead of the pack of destroyers when I go to sleep. Now she's at the helm. She's become much more aggressive in the
Of
dream
course.
plane.
Yeah.
So she's getting them. If they find me doing anything, like if they find me, even if I find a broken down car, I can drive away and they're able to, she tells them and they find me.
Can I explain what often happens to a wife whose husband abuses his children? The wife often feels jealous of the of the child. Do you understand? And as a result of their jealousy, they often project at the child that it's the child's problem as well, and that they enter a competition with their child. And from that point on, if it develops into rage, they become resentful of the child's existence, resentful of what the child does, resentful of any success the child might have, and so therefore becomes the leader of a group of people who attack the child. Does that make sense?
And one more thing, when I'm...
And can I just stop you for a sec? You're not feeling what I'm saying to you, right? And it's okay. You're allowed to not feel what I'm saying to you. But if what I was saying to you was hitting your heart, you would already be probably crying by now.
Well, that's my thing, is I'm afraid of getting blamed for what they're doing to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, you do believe you are to blame for what they're doing to you. Right? And this is what shuts down your grief about what they're doing. See, you believe that you were to blame for them feeling that you were to blame for existing even. No, they had sex. That's how you came into their family, you know, and that attracted you as a soul into their family. But you believe it's your fault somehow because they felt it was your fault. And that's what's shutting you down emotionally. So if you allowed yourself to feel, right, that it's not your fault, and there's no need to do that, Jen. If you just allowed yourself to feel that it's not their fault, not your fault, but theirs, and allowed yourself to see that, you would connect to the grief more readily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think when I look at them, when I know this thing's going on in my life, I'm afraid I'll be blamed for the fact that this attraction's there, kind of a thing.
Yeah, the reality is there are feelings in you that do allow the attraction, but you did not even put these feelings there. So you're not to blame for the feelings existing, but the feelings are in you and only you can release them. So it's a very different viewpoint. You're not to blame, but you need to take responsibility for the feelings to release them, otherwise they will stay with you. Does that make sense? So the key now is to allow yourself to feel your way through these things, and some of these, so Monty, some of these statements that you make about yourself now are clues as to what's getting projected at you all the time. And the key for you is to allow yourself to feel your grief and fear about those things. And if you did that, you'll release those beliefs. And once those beliefs leave you, it'll be like creating a wall, a spiritual wall, against the attack. And after that time, nobody will attack. Does that make sense? So when I first started telling people that I was Jesus, it was nearly 10 years ago, right? In the first year, I used to get phone calls from people who said they were going to murder me. And I used to get a lot of them. Like, there was a couple of people in particular who concerned me enough to think about calling the police, you know, because of how strong their level of rage was. And to be honest with you, if I didn't deal with some emotions, I'm pretty sure they would have killed me during that time. That's how they were willing to, and they told me they were going to, and they had the plans all set in place. But what happened was I dealt with some emotions about being attacked. And after 1 year, I didn't receive a single call from them anymore. Not a single one. But instead, I started receiving a lot of emails about getting attacked. And once I dealt with some more emotions about it, all of those emails stopped. There was one time when I received about 180 emails in the space of a week of people who were going to murder me. Right? And I dealt with a lot of emotion about all of that. And then all of those emails stopped, and it doesn't seem... We had a lot of media attention after that, and I didn't get any emails at all from anybody who said they were going to murder me. There were people who just called me an idiot then, so then I had to feel about that. Does that make sense? So I had to work my way through specific emotions. Every time you work your way through a specific emotion, what happens is it's like a barrier, and it's a natural barrier of love that actually gets established. It's not based on fear or terror or control or any of those things. It's just a barrier that gets established where you no longer, for example, if you dealt with your terror, you would no longer feel worried about terror. You would no longer feel terror inside of you. You would no longer feel terrified about any event. And probably fear would also go once that occurs. And now you'd have a barrier. And as a result of this barrier, you would no longer attract events that would make you feel terrified. Whether those events occurred in the sleep state or the awake state, doesn't matter. You just no longer attract them. So a lot of the times now, like people think, boy, you know, you must get a lot of attack. And no, I don't. I don't get a lot of attack now. But that's 10 years after dealing with, like the first 5 years, I just got attacked all the time, like all the time. And I had to work through lots of emotions before this barrier naturally established itself. And as a result, hardly get any now. Still get occasional ones for different reasons, but not like hundreds of them anymore. And I don't, you know, get people on the phone yelling and screaming at me and telling me they're going to cut and slit my throat and rape Mary and all those kind of things anymore, right? So, you know, the attack has reduced because you deal with some of the emotions. So the secret to this is deal with the emotions you feel and actually feel them. Allow yourself to feel them. but realise you're not to blame for them. And this is what's shutting you down, is that there's a feeling in you that you are to blame for them. That shuts you from feeling them. And when you blame yourself for things that happened in your childhood, you are really falling into the trap of reinforcing your parents' beliefs all over again with yourself. You're basically telling yourself what they told you, thinking that it will protect you. Now that worked when you were little, right? And the only reason why it worked was because you became in agreement with your parent, and therefore parents who feel the agreement generally feel that that means that the child doesn't need to be corrected in some way. Makes sense? But as an adult, you are allowed to have a different opinion. And the only way you're going to maintain a different opinion is by working your way through the emotions that have been created. And the only reason why you'll do that is when you stop believing that they are all your fault. That's the only way you'll stop doing that. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah.